All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Living into a Bigger Story. Great to see your faces. And thank you for those who are here live, as well as those who will be listening to the playback. This is our sixth and final event in this six-part Medicine Weaver mini series on the topic of bringing your medicine into the world. And today, with the topic of living into a bigger story, it was actually when I started this series, really, this last event was a bit of a mystery, like what the theme was going to be, how it was all going to tie together. And Mandy and I, who I'll introduce more in a moment, but we actually had several conversations through the process of kind of just like feeling into what it was going to be. And it finally clicked into place. And it feels to me, it feels like a really wonderful way to complete this series and this topic of bringing your medicine into the world, because one of the things I've been just reflecting on is how this topic really is about initiation. It's about the journey of dying and being reborn over and over again, dying to who we've been and being reborn to a more true version of ourselves. I think that's one way maybe of seeing the journey of bringing medicine into the world, is just this ongoing initiative process. And so today we get to end on a note of listening to a story that Mandy's going to offer, as well as exploring the role of story in supporting each one of us in our journeys of initiation and bringing medicine into the world. So, Mandy, thank you so much for being here. Mandy is one of my dear friends, and we actually met through the school that I went to for nature connected coaching. Mandy did as well. We weren't even in the same class, though. We were sort of match made. I was thinking about that, how we were like match made as friends, because the instructor for the program thought that we would get along well, and it turns out he was right. So Mandy, if you want to, I was thinking if you want to say hello to everyone, maybe you could do that in the context of kind of introducing yourself in how story has impacted you. How has story become an important part of your life, and how has story been medicine for you in your journey?
Yeah.
And whatever else you'd like to add.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thanks, Megan, for having me. It is a total honor to be here, and I agree. I think we were match made, which was wonderful, and I'm grateful to be here with you all. Um, how has story's been a huge part of me and my understanding of my life and who I am, and which is continually evolving, which is what I understand about story. It's like the purpose of story is not to understand it, because if we understood the story, it would be flat and it would have nothing else to offer us. It's like the purpose of story is rather more about being in curiosity and being in relationship with the mystery and listening and trying to kind of understand what's trying to be conveyed. So story to me is really about relationship and relationship with a mystery that is continually evolving. And so for me, I think that element has always been present for me in the way that I relate to my life. However, I didn't have words to understand that relationship with my life until I started to learn about mythological story and storytelling. And probably around the time that I was going to the coaching school, um, I started to get a lot more into storytelling and listening to, like, going to visit and listen to storytellers. And a whole world opened up for me because I could hear my own experience through the archetypes that were being conveyed through these mythological stories. And I started to hear, like, oh my gosh, like this underworld journey is something that happens. It's like this deep dark place that I find myself in. This is something that has happened since time immemorial. It's not like I'm weird or broken or messed up or something. Like this is ancient wisdom. And I could like have some sort of context for the difficult or joyous or weird or whatever kind of passages I was going through. And so I just became like enamored with storytelling. And I realized that it's always been a part of the way that I have related to my life. I just didn't even fully recognize it. Like one of the big stories in my life is surviving a high level spinal cord injury and head injury from a bike accident that I was in. And I recall that, when I was hit in that bike accident, I was paralyzed on the spot. I found myself when I came back to consciousness laying on the concrete, and I couldn't move and I couldn't feel, and I could move my eyeballs around, but like that was it. And I remember immediately, like right then, something in me was like, "Oh, this is fascinating. Like this is really interesting that this is how my story goes. Like that this is the next chapter." And I think that's something innate in me, and maybe in all of us, that we are living a story and we don't know how it goes. We kind of like to think that we do, but we don't know what the next chapter is. And I think when we can see our lives through the lens of story, there can be a whole lot more curiosity around it, around whatever it is. I mean, that was a dark, difficult time for me, but through the lens of story was like, interesting. This is interesting. Like a page turner, like what happens next? Oh my gosh. And that's a whole lot different, and like more expansive and more fun, I think, at the end of the day, um, than like the smaller stories that we can kind of get stuck in. So I don't know if I really introduced myself. I sort of started going on a tangent, but
Yeah, no, I love that. I love the something about the way you were describing the mystery of it and that moment in the accident of like, um, isn't this an interesting next aspect of my story? It gave me this sense of like it's like our story is being revealed to us as we go, or this element of something bigger being part of our story.
yeah.
And at the same time, at the end there, I heard also a choice, sort of like there are a lot of ways that I think you in that moment could have responded.
Hmm.
And it seems like your first place was to go to a bigger story, what I would imagine is a bigger story. And then but you also reference like this idea of smaller stories.
Hmm.
Is there anything more you can add to that of like what maybe in that instance, what would have been a smaller story, or how can we understand like what is a bigger story, what is a smaller story?
Hmm. That's a good question. I don't know in that instance what a smaller story would have been, but I think when I think of like bigger versus smaller story, um, it's almost like the difference in vision, between narrow, kind of like macro oriented vision to wide angle, expansive, eagle eye view vision.
Hmm.
And maybe, a smaller story is one where we can't see outside of that, the immediacy of what we're in. So in the immediacy of what we're in, maybe we feel victimized. Maybe we feel like, ah, poor me, or oh, I'm just so angry that this is happening, or that I get this a lot in life, or whatever. And it's like it's so small. It's so just personal, like very personal. And and you know, and it's not like that's wrong or off. Like some things are personal, and those feelings that come up on the personal level of the story are very valid and real, and there's absolutely nothing wrong about that. There's also like a lot to be gained though from that wide angle, from the zooming out, from the eagle eye, the bigger picture, where you you know, you can recognize like, okay, this is me in the smaller story, this is me having a personal experience, and from the bigger picture, maybe I'm living within a much bigger story. Maybe there's a much bigger story happening, and I think there's a lot of ways to tap into the bigger story. You know, I think we all kind of live in the smaller story most of the time. Like that's part of the human condition, probably. It's just it's what we do. It's like it's connected to ego, and it's connected to, you know, this little life that I think I'm living. And I think there are many tools that can help us expand out into a bigger story, and that is not often our default. But for me, like I think of, I read astrology charts as well, and like have studied evolutionary astrology, and for me that is a huge way to tap into the bigger story, because it's like it gives us a lens to see that there is something much bigger than just this life even that I'm living. There's a thread that I'm experiencing a part of, but I'm a part of a much bigger um, progression of things that I can't even fully understand. Or I think about like the fascination with, for me, my ancestors and that bigger story. Like, what am I a part of? What am I downstream of or upstream of? You know, if I end up having descendants, it's sort of like there's there's a way to start to like come out and tap into something that's much bigger that's happening, and in that way, you know, to go back to like the story that, oh, this is an interesting next chapter of my story analogy. It's kind of like, instead of just looking at that one paragraph, you can see like, oh, this is a chapter in a series of books. You know, like I'm only understanding this one little part, but there's something much bigger happening, which allows for some space for spirit to enter, for something greater to be a part of the mystery of whatever is being lived out through us.
Hmm. I hear in that too. It's like almost like a avenue for getting out of the way a little bit. What I think of is getting out of the way, like almost like taking the pressure off
Mm-hmm.
to um to figure it out or to fix it or to understand it even. It's like as you're saying that, I'm imagining just leaning back into the mystery of uh or I know I don't know isn't always a comfort, but in what you're saying, I felt a sense of comfort of just like, something bigger is going on here and I don't have to understand it. I can just live it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. And which I think in those times, to kind of come back to the idea of initiation and what you've been working with in this series, like in those times of initiation, um, there's like a different quality, I think, to the initiatory experience, that sometimes you find yourself in an initiation. You didn't choose it. It's here. It just came. It's time. And that is a different kind of quality than those passages where we're in like action mode, where we're in like go get it mode, or like, yeah, I have the vision, I know what I want, I'm gonna go get it. And for me, in my experience, initiation is not like that. It shows up at your door and you're like, oh geez, like, oh my, you know, you're just, it comes when it comes, and oftentimes it's a very challenging experience. And and I think maybe for me, having some access to the bigger story, to that way of thinking, helps me with the acceptance that's needed for the challenging initiatory experiences.
For another dive into the underworld.
Yeah. Because, like, you could be in the underworld and resist the hell out of it, but then, what good is that? You're
Yeah.
expending all your energy resisting it, hating it, trying to get out of it, and then not in that way, like, not able to harvest the medicine from it, just trying to get out. And I think, you know, and you'll probably hear this in the story. The story that I'm going to tell is one that has profoundly affected me. And when we can be in the underworld, when we can accept what's there, when we can like surrender to it, the medicine that is for us appears, and then it matures, and then it helps inform us of who we are and what we're doing here. And so there's something about a story that helps me tap into that kind of acceptance and gratitude, actually, for the underworld journeys, because it's just, I see them as the myths tell them, that this is a beautiful gift to get to go through.
Yeah, I think about maybe one really simple way is like this is happening for me rather than this is happening to me.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like it's a just the total it's such a subtle difference in the statement, but like um recognizing that actually, even though it's really uncomfortable, it's part of a really beautiful and important process that's designed for me,
Yeah.
like in my journey, to support me in what I'm asking for,
Right.
even though it might be wretched in
Right.
certain moments or feel wretched, right? Or just be like immensely challenging.
Right.
Um,
Right.
we we had a question come through about someone shared they have two big stories running at the moment and one smaller one. Will we have an opportunity to share at some point? But yeah, so we're gonna speak a little more, and then sorry, I didn't really talk about the flow of today before we dove in. I'm realizing Mandy and I are gonna talk a little bit more about this. She'll share a story, and then afterwards we'll come back. We'll have about like 20-30 minutes at the end, and there'll be some times for questions and just sharing how the story impacted you, and we'll leave space for that for sure. um so yeah, I I didn't mean to cut you off, Mandy. Were you going to say something else?
Mm, I don't know. It's gone. It's probably not.
um, let's see here. So one of the things I'm recognizing as we're talking about this is that we're talking about initiation. Um, and I'm curious if you had like, do you have a definition for that, or how do you describe initiation? Um,
That's a good question. I don't have like a definition like in mind, but how I would describe initiation or initiatory experiences, I think has a lot to do with um, and some element of challenge, and enough challenge that we might get pushed kind of to our brink, to our edge, to where we find that we have to let whatever is old drop away or die, so to speak, and surrender allowing, like asking, inviting in something greater to help us through to what is wanting to come forward next. And for me, like, and from everything in my own experience in my life, and from everything that I've learned from indigenous ways, some element of challenge is required in that, because we're human beings and we're stubborn and we get stuck in our ways. And it's really, I know for me, like it, like learning to surrender has been a freaking process. It is like, it's hard for me. It has historically been very difficult for me to learn to let go and allow in something, allow in the unknown, and allow myself to be carried by the spirits that help me. And that's been really, really hard for me. Like I've had to get to, life or death places almost, to in that space I can let go. In that space I can allow in some help from something greater, but not in the day to day. In the day to day, you know, I would imagine most humans are like this too. I It's harder for me to get to that place of like truly praying or truly asking or truly inviting in help. And I think that that's probably a fairly common experience as a human being, and that part of initiation is that we get to that challenge, we get to that edge to where we're like, okay, like this is not possible for me to go it alone anymore. I have to like relinquish control here and invite in some help. So to me, that's part of the recipe of initiation.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know. I'd be kind of curious what you think of when you
Mm,
think of
yeah,
that. If you have a definition.
I didn't have a set definition in mind when I asked it, but as you were speaking, I was thinking, well, one thing, it just reminds me of a pressure cooker. What you were describing is kind of like amplifying and turning the volume up.
Mm-hmm.
But I think probably if you look it up in the dictionary, there are a lot of different forms of initiation. I think when I'm speaking, what we're speaking of is like soul initiation. And I think there are these uh, moments in life, like you said, where you don't know when the next round is coming, but it's kind of like something there's usually a catalyzing moment. I think it's like initiating, and it's beginning this next uh, round of death and rebirth, so that a bigger expression of soul can come through, so that more medicine can come through. And that doesn't happen once. As far as I can tell, it happened. um I think it can be activated through intention. I don't know that I understand the mystery of it, but it seems that some people um, bring about initiation in their lives more than others. Um, and maybe that's just a perspective, but I do think something can happen when a person really commits to that process of like wanting to bring their soul expression into the world. That in itself maybe catalyzes initiation. That intention, that prayer, that ask can create just this an opening to soul initiation. And then how it happens, in what ways, in what timing, is unique to each person.
Mm-hmm.
But that sort of each round, I imagine, like is like a recognition that things cannot continue as they are.
Right.
And then this dip into the underworld, the darkness, the mystery, that which we haven't yet seen or discovered about ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And they may be hard things to look at. They may be uh, beautiful things to look at. Like, or both. I find usually there's some of both.
Mm-hmm.
But there's like a sacrifice involved. I know in ceremonies sometimes I've done this pilgrimage for like I've I've done it so far, I've 7 times, and I feel like I'm still learning. And maybe you're always still learning, but
Mhm.
it's a big process. It's a um, 5-day pilgrimage, and there's ceremony, and one ceremony in at night, and it's an initiation. It's designed as a very intentional initiation. So I think some initiations just happen through the mystery of life. We don't like say yes to a ceremony or an event or this or that. But then I think some can be more proactive and intentional.
Mhm.
And one of the things that like my ego will resist going back to the desert because we stay up all night, um, eating peyote and being very cold, and it can be extremely uncomfortable, and it's not easy. It's a purification, and um, oftentimes there's a moment of like where like my ego will come in and be like, "Why did I do this again?" Because I know how much um, is ahead of me. It's usually very early in the night. And then I just at some point in the series of 7 years got to a point where I'm like, okay, that I'm done with that because that doesn't help the ceremony at all. Feeding that thought, asking that question gets me nowhere. Um, and what I've learned through this is that the sacrifice, like you said, there's a challenge. For me, one of the things that's come is like sacrifice is part of the initiation. Like something absolutely has to be given up, something has to be let down and let go in order for change to happen.
Mhm.
There's like no way to become different without becoming different, right? And and so I think a lot of indigenous ceremonies involve sacrifice, involve some sort of like change in diet or fasting or something that's painful or um, like really intense to the ego or the mind or like the emotional body or whatever. And but through that, like you said, there's a letting go
Mhm.
eventually.
Mhm. Yeah, I think you're right. I feel like that element of sacrifice, whether the initiation is chosen, is intentional, or it arrives at your doorstep, there I feel like you're right that there is an element of sacrifice that is it's required. It's part of it. I mean, and if you resist, like let's say it shows up at your door, the initiation, and you resist and you're like, no, I'm not letting go. I'm not willing to make room. That's okay. But you might just like go around the wheel again. And it's like I totally agree with what you said that you can't become different. You can't the soul cannot evolve or change or move into whatever it is wanting to grow into if there's no room made. Like we have to sacrifice, we have to release, we have to um, cleanse, clear out, let go in order to make room for whatever wants to grow. It's just like the medicine wheel. I mean, like we have to go through the winter to through a time of emptiness or stripping away in order for the seed to germinate and gestate and be able to emerge again.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes the sacrifice is like it can look so many different ways. Sometimes it's big. Sometimes it's something that is like creates a lot of security, like a job or a relationship or and sometimes it's just a way of being, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but, maybe trying to control things or um, sacrificing. One of the things I've just been I was sharing with Mandy before we got on, but it's been a little bit of a unexpected dip into the underworld for me started about 3 weeks ago. So I thought this topic was perfect for me as well, on a personal level, just to get perspectives, right, as I'm going through my own thing. But what I feel I'm being asked to sacrifice is self-doubt.
Mm,
And
mm,
um, I didn't realize how like much I had been hanging. I couldn't even actually fully see it, um, and and until very recently. And now it can see how attached I've been to it.
mm,
I'm not sure why at this point.
mhm.
I don't even need to explain. But yeah, so I think it can be abstract, or it can be uh or it, and sometimes it's both, right? It's like I can speak personally. I can see how self-doubt has played into some of the decisions I've made in my life.
Mhm.
Where now I need to go look at that and say like, "Oh wow, I think this agreement, this thing I've said yes to was born of self-doubt." So if I said yes to this and I'm letting go of the self-doubt, I also need to let go of this agreement or this agreement or this agreement. And
Yeah.
um, those can be really big and very shattering to the or uncomfortable to the ego.
Yeah. And I would add too that sometimes for me, like I don't even have the awareness of what it is that's being sacrificed exactly at at all times. Like I really don't. I mean, sometimes it's it's clear on a level, like on a physical level, that sacrifice is needed and it's happening, and it's like it's just happening. Um, and yet it won't be until like a while later and in hindsight that I understand the emotional or the spiritual implications of that. Like you're talking about self-doubt and having this awareness of that, which is so beautiful. And I guess I'm just adding that sometimes I don't even know what it's about, the sacrifice. It's just clear that it's necessary for just to make that like understandable. Like, I mean, for like the bike accident, for example, that was a sacrifice for sure. I mean, sacrificing the ability to be in a functioning body, the ability to have like a normal life for a couple of years, and it took me a long time to unravel like what the heck that sacrifice was about. There was that instantaneous like curiosity of like, whoa, this is an interesting next chapter. But then what became such a focus for me and so difficult was unraveling like, well, what does this mean? What's this about on the spiritual level and on the emotional level? Or like I had just come through a very challenging year. This entire year has been a pretty big underworld journey for me. And part of it, like one little piece of it, was having this infestation of bat bugs, which turns out they're the cousin of bed bugs. And they were coming from the bats that were living in the roof of the cabin that I live in. And it was like worst nightmare. I mean, for me, just total worst nightmare. Like it was a couple of months of extreme challenge and huge sacrifice. Like getting rid of so much stuff and having to get exterminator out here and redo the roof, and like I've let go of so much. And so going through that process was very clear on the physical level to me, like there is something greater that is helping me to clear out, to cleanse, to purge, to simplify. I don't know what that's about yet. I'm still completely in the mystery. Like what is the initiation about? Where is this heading? I don't know, but it's obviously here. And so I think sometimes sometimes we can have awareness of what it's about, like what the content is, and sometimes it's just that comes in a lot later.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. This for me was a rather more clarity than I usually have in these journeys. But the first it really only came in the last few days, seeing it more clearly. The first 3 weeks were rather agonizing,
Mm, totally.
the mystery of it. And
Not.
sometimes, yeah, and sometimes it's years of mystery, right?
Hmm.
Or like as you said in the beginning, like part of it too, it's like I can make meaning of it on one level. And in this case, making meaning is helping me.
Hmm.
But then there's also a bigger mystery still that I'm living into with all of it. One of the questions I have is like, who would I be without self-doubt?
Hmm. Beautiful.
And that's a big mystery.
Yeah.
I don't know,
Yeah.
but I'm interested in finding out.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful. I feel like my work has really taken shape because it feels so important to me to make meaning of the initiatory experiences we've gone through, of the challenges, of the passages that don't make sense. And I think that's so related to story because um, we could go through very difficult passages and stay in the smaller story and just be like, oh man, I mean, one example of a small story is like shit happens. It's it. It's hard. I have bad luck. Whatever. Like there's not really meaning, and the story is small, and it's like, ah, oh, yeah, life's hard. I mean, I kind of grew up hearing the phrase like life's a bitch and then you die, and I'm like, that's a terrible story. I hate that story. I don't want to live that story,
Right.
and nothing in my soul believes that's true. And yet the people some of the folks I was around, like, that's true for them. That's the story they're living, and whatever story you're living, whatever story you're within, that's true. That's real. That's your reality. But I recognize, like, I get the opportunity to change mine. I don't have to stay in that because it doesn't feel right for me. It's not true for me. And um, yes, difficult things happen. Yeah. Like, so in some sense, yeah, that's true. Shit does happen. Like, difficult things happen. And there's so much beauty possible when you tell a different story about it. And I find that, like, that's the kind of work I'm fascinated in doing with folks, is to expand our idea of what's happening in our lives and what it means, like to really kind of excavate and get curious about and explore what it might mean. And when we do, it's like, whoa, world's open. Like, entire world's open, and it's so beautiful. Someone can go from being traumatized to being fascinated. And it doesn't mean that the trauma's not there. We have to work with the, the wounds. We have to tend the wounds. But there's so much more possible when we kind of can shift whatever we believe we're living within.
Yeah. I feel like that's a really nice segue into perhaps story time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Just
you want to hear a story?
yeah, part of this we wanted to Mandy and I were talking about how it's like there's only so much talking about story we can do, and then we need a story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Um, which will, I think, just speak for itself. So do you want to intro the story at all, or
I'll say a little bit about it. This is a story that I know of from a mentor of mine, Cater Brown, who's an amazing storyteller. And it's called The Nubian Woman, and it's from East Africa. Um, Lawrence Vanderpost, I don't know if any of you are familiar with that author. He writes about this story too. And um, so it's an old story from East Africa. And what I will say about story is that I mentioned this in the beginning, I'll just mention it again, that the purpose of story is not to understand the story. There may be places in the story that don't make sense, or that are, that you don't fully get. And the purpose is not to like figure it out. it's really more about being in relationship with the story. So as you listen, noticing where you enter the story, like where you really start to be in the story or visualize the story, or where the story captures you. And then also to notice where you leave the story, where maybe your mind goes elsewhere, or you get stuck on that one part of the story and you're just hanging out in it. And that's not wrong. There's no right or wrong. It's really just about noticing, because these stories, old stories, mythological stories, they're medicine stories. And if we fully understand them, they're they're dead. They have nothing else to offer us. So really, to be in relationship with a medicine story is to be curious, to notice, and to let the story inform you of what's alive in you. And I'll also say that, like, the way I have learned about and think about medicine stories is that on one level it's a story, like these things happened, but really, the way I think deeper about medicine stories is that every aspect in the story is representative of an aspect of a part of us within, and has in some way something to teach us about the the relationships that we carry within ourselves. So that's my little
Mm,
intro. And
beautiful.
anything else before we dive in?
Is there anything, for listening to the story, is it better to close your eyes or keep them open, or any guidance you have?
I don't have a suggestion either way on closing eyes, keeping them open. I would just say get comfortable and relax and listen. And again, notice what happens for you within the story, where you enter and where you exit, what gets evoked in you. Um, and don't worry about it. Just let it wash over.
Okay.
Okay, so the Nubian woman. Hmm. Once upon a time, or once below a time, or once within a time, in this strange online gathering with sage burning, drinks nearby, listening through this airwaves to an ancient, ancient story. Maybe within that time, there was a village. And this village existed a long, long time ago, in a place far, far from here. This village existed farther east than the sun and farther west than the moon. And in this village, there was a lodge. Standing outside of the lodge is a circle of warriors, standing shoulder to shoulder, facing out. And standing inside of that lodge, inside of that circle of warriors facing out, is a circle of grandmothers facing in. And inside of that circle of grandmothers is a woman, breathing heavy, grunting, laboring to bring new life into her village. And there's singing, and there's chanting, and there's rattling, and there's drumming from all the villagers all around, offering prayers of gratitude for this new life that has chosen to enter this village. And just the way that you would when a woman is preparing to bring new life into this village, you can hear grunting, you can hear heavy breathing, you can hear laboring and shouting. And just as lightning hits the earth, a new life comes in. Cries can be heard. And just as this little infant young girl opens her mouth to speak of where she came from and why she came here and what gifts she has to bring to the village, cries come out. She realizes she doesn't know the language. She wants so desperately to speak of what it is she's here to bring, and she can't figure out how. So she decides to wait, learn the language of these people, and then she can share. Time goes on, new moon follows full moon, follows new moon, follows full moon. And this girl listens and she sits around council fires with her elders, listening to stories, learning the language, learning the mannerisms, learning the ways of this new land. And as time stretches on, so does a forgetting. As she gets farther away from the other world from which she came, she kind of forgets of that intention. She kind of forgets and becomes a little bit more disconnected from where she was even from in the beginning and why she came here. With that forgetting, with that disconnection, starts to come a loneliness. With that loneliness starts to come a longing to find her way, a longing to figure out who she is, a longing to fit in somewhere. With that longing, she starts to feel that sense of isolation, confusion that many of us are familiar with. And as happens often, what is going on within is mirrored from without. So as she is dealing with this isolation and this loneliness and this desire to fit in, she starts to notice she's surrounded by girls. Girls in a clique, girls who tease and make fun of her, girls who make her feel like she doesn't fit in. And she just wants that so desperately. She kind of hits that spot of betwixt and between, that spot that happens oftentimes when we're about 15. That spot where we don't really know, we're kind of done with where we've been or who we've been or what we've been up to, but we don't know what's coming next, and we just feel kind of uncomfortable in our skin. That betwixt and between. Maybe it happens at 15 or 30 or 40 or 50 or 60. She begins to feel the tug and the pull into something new, to find her way into something that feels more authentic to her, to find her way, to find her place where she fits. And as she feels this tug and this pull, she begins walking, she begins exploring. So one day she walks down by the river. She sees these other girls down by the river. She goes down to talk to them, see if she can fit in with them, perhaps. She tries again. And these other girls are down there, and she notices something really peculiar. None of these girls are wearing their necklace. And this is very peculiar, because Here in this village, the necklace is very significant. It talks of what clan you're from. It talks of the medicine that you come into this life with. It talks of who you are and what you're here to bring, what you're here to contribute. Everybody wears their necklace. And these girls weren't. And this girl, being who she was, wanting so desperately to fit in, she asked them, "Oh my gosh, I noticed you're not wearing your necklace. Where'd you put your necklaces? Wherever you put yours, I'll put mine too." And these girls conspire, say, "Oh, we threw our necklaces into the river. You should throw yours in there too." This girl thought this was very strange, but being who she was, she thought about it. She remembered the stories from her grandmothers and her ancestors of the spirit of the river, the magic of the river, the power of the river. She thought about it. She walked over to the river and she listened for just a moment. And what she felt was a yes. So she took off her necklace. She held it out. She held out her arm over the river. She let it go. Down, down, down. Her necklace falls to the bottom of the river. Now these girls, they start laughing at her. "You fool! You silly girl, what were you thinking? To drop your necklace into the river. We would never have done that." And they go over to the bank of the river and they dig out their necklaces from the mud, put them back on, walk away. Now this girl feels completely betrayed, hurt, abandoned, can't believe it. Now she's losing her necklace and these girls have completely betrayed her. She picks herself up off the ground and she walks forward. She walks up that bank of the river into the night, into a long night of questions. The way that you'd walk into a night of questions after betrayal, after that period of not knowing who you are and just trying so hard to figure it out, getting pushed down again. Now some say she walked into that night of questions for years, 10 years, 20 years. We don't really know. But she walked for a long, long time. Till one day, she heard a noise coming from the river. She stopped, and again, being who she was, she listened, she respected, she honored the spirit of the river. And what she heard from the river, when she stopped, she stepped out on that rock, listened, and the river said, "Plunge in. Plunge in," the river said. So this girl stepped out onto that rock and she offered prayers of gratitude for her life, prayers of gratitude for the lives of her ancestors. And she jumped down, down, down to the bottom of the river. She went. As she descends down to the bottom of the river, the silt settles, the way silt settles when something huge, when something magnificent falls into the river. She takes a moment, she looks around, she gathers herself. And about 30 yards away or so, across the river, she sees a fire at the bottom of the river. She finds that peculiar. So she walks over to that fire. And as she gets closer, she sees an old woman. This old woman is stoking the fire with a long stick, just stirring the coals, keeping the fire hot. Now this girl knows, okay, I'm not in the ordinary world anymore. I'm at the bottom of a river with a fire, with an old woman stoking the coals. I am no longer in the ordinary world. I'm in the underworld. Things are different here. So she stays curious. She gets closer to this old woman, and as she does, she notices this old woman has wounds and bruises and pus seeping out all over her body. And this girl holds the woman in her gaze for just a moment, watching her. And the woman says, "Lick my wounds. Lick my wounds," she says to the girl. And again, the girl being who she was, knowing the old stories, trusting that she's in the other world, she steps closer. She takes a risk. She holds up the old woman's arm and she begins to lick those wounds, tending to those wounds. And as she does, a short while later, she starts to see this tiny little firelight, this tiny little ember that starts to grow inside the old woman's chest. Now, pretty soon, she starts to see those wounds healed. She starts to see a brightness in the old woman's eyes that wasn't there before. Now, this old river hag stands tall, strong, bright-eyed. She holds this woman, this girl woman, in her gaze. She extends out her arms, scoops this girl woman up in her arms and holds her fast with a fierce love, a fierce, compassionate love, the kind that you would have if your wounds had been licked. Now, this girl, not being used to any kind of connection or intimacy, this makes her pretty uncomfortable. She's not used to being held fast. She's squirmy. And her squirms turn to frustration. And the old woman holds her fast to her chest. And that frustration, it turns to anger. And that anger, it turns to rage. And this girl is just raging. All those years of confusion, of hurt, of isolation, of betrayal, she is raging. So much that the top of the river is just turbulent, as if a hurricane had just blown through. And yet, the old woman holds her fast to her chest. This fierce love. And the girl lets all the rage move out. And for a moment, she's quiet and just at peace. And pretty soon, a tear starts to flow. The way that tears flow once you get underneath the anger. And one tear turns to 20, turns to 30, turns to 300. So much sadness starts flowing through, and grief. So much grief that they say that the water increased 30-fold that day. And the grief that the girl was experiencing, she didn't even know where it was coming from. It might not even have been hers. It might have been her ancestors. Who knows? But it was flowing through her. And the old woman held her close. And that grief subsided to just a few more tears, which subsided to this quiet, tired peace. And when she was finally fully at peace, the old woman let her down, let her go. The old woman held her in her gaze, and the girl held the old woman in her gaze, as if to say thank you. Before long, all of a sudden, there was a sound. Something was happening. Something was rattling at the bottom of the ocean. The old woman knew what it was. She was familiar with that. Old river demon just coming down the pike. The old woman, quick, get into the lodge. Hide yourself in that lodge. I'll take care of you. And so the girl goes into the lodge, closes the door. The river demon comes out and says, "Oh, river hag, I smell someone different down here. Where is she?" The old river hag says, "Oh, that girl? Oh, I think she went that way. I think it was yesterday. Yeah, she went that way. Oh, wait, no. Or maybe it was 2 days ago and she went the other way. Oh, I can't quite remember, but whatever it is, she's pretty far from here. You're gonna have to run pretty fast to go catch her." Quickly, the old river demon runs off and tries to find the old girl. And as the water settles, the girl comes out. And before she can even say thank you, with the gratitude that had built up in her chest for this old river hag, clap. The river hag claps, and out pops the girl onto the shoreline. 2 seconds later, her necklace pops out. And this necklace now had been like nothing anybody had ever seen before, full of gems and seashells and rich colors and smells and shapes that nobody had ever seen before. It was like nothing that village had ever seen. The girl puts on her necklace and she starts to walk. With this gratitude in her chest, she's actually now a woman. Some say she was down there for a day. Some say she was down there for 30. We don't really know. But long enough for her necklace to completely transform and for her to feel that sense of belonging, that sense of being loved, of being valued, being cared for, and caring for another. Now those girls came back. They see this necklace and they say, "Oh my God, where did you get that necklace? That thing is amazing. We've never seen anything like that before. Where did you get that?" And the girl says, "Oh, this? Being who she was, she was going to tell the truth. I got this at the bottom of the river from the old hag that lives down there." And the girl said, "Oh my God, we have to go there. We got to go get one of those. This is amazing." And before that girl could even say, "Wait," the girls jumped down, 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 down. To the bottom of the river they go. Now, as you know, they get down to the bottom of the river and they see that fire. And they walk over to that fire and they see this old river hag. And they see the pus and they see the bruises and they see the wounding and that old river hag. They walk up to her and they say, hey, old woman, we're wondering, where can we get one of those necklaces? Where can we get one of those necklaces that are so cool? Now, this old woman is not one for questions. She does not answer direct questions. She just says, "Lick my wounds." And these girls, not knowing the old stories, "Ew, gross, that's disgusting. No way, no, we're not into that. We want to know where we can get one of those necklaces. Come on, please tell us." "Lick my wounds," the old river hag says. And these girls say, "Oh God, no way in hell. Nope, we're not. Gross. No thanks, old woman." Pretty soon, you know what happens. That old river demon comes around. "Oh, river hag, I smell one of those girls again. Where are they? I can smell them." And that river hag doesn't do anything to tell them about the lodge, to protect them. The river hag just says, "Girls, you better get on running." So the girls run off. And that demon runs after them. Now, some say that those girls are still running. Running down there at the bottom of the river. Running from addiction. Running from anxiety. Running from depression. Running from compulsions. Running from themselves. Some say they're still running. Meanwhile, our girl living at the top, found her place in the village. She actually found her place at the edge of the village, where she's most comfortable, at the edge between this world and that, watching, observing the others of the village, such that she could see when others, youngers, would get to that place of betwixt and between, trying to remember where they came from and why they were here, trying to remember what their medicine was. And when she would find them, she would tell them about the spirit of the river. She would teach them about being in gratitude and saying those prayers of gratitude for our life and the lives of our ancestors. She would teach them about how to listen to the spirit of the river. And some say that she is still there at the edge of the river, forming those relationships, deepening into that underworld journey with others as they go, finding their sacred necklace. And you might think like, okay, well, that's cool. I mean, it's a really interesting story, Mandy, and that sounds far out there. And you said that this happens in a village that's far from here in a time that's like a long time ago. And what does this really have to do with us now? Like, these kinds of villages don't actually even really exist now at all, do they? Or if they do, I don't have access to them. And I would just say, I don't know. Maybe it's possible that this village is here right now. And if you listen to the spirit of the river, maybe the spirit of the river right now is saying, plunge in, plunge in, plunge in to the bottom of the river and see where this river might take you.
Thank you, Mandy.
Mm-hmm.
That was a treat.
Hmm.
That's the first time I think I've heard you do a little bit of that, but that's the first time I got to really hear you share a story like
Yeah,
that.
such a treat. I just love what's what's possible. You know, as we were talking about before, just getting to see yourself through the lens of story, and every part of that story I can relate to personally, and
Hmm.
has had a profound effect on me. And I I hope in the telling of it can continue to have a profound effect on others.
Hmm. Yeah, I felt a bit altered by it. I'm even like coming back. I'm like,
Yeah, yeah. I feel curious. You know, I'm always kind of curious to hear from folks like, where did you find yourself entering the story? Because it's not always at the beginning, you know. Sometimes it's at a different spot, or were there places where you found yourself kind of sticking for a while?
hmm. Yeah, we can. Do you want to open it up for people to respond?
Yeah.
We can do. Um, we can do chat. This is being recorded. If you're comfortable coming off mute and it won't record your video, but it'll record your voice if you want to share verbally, or you could pop written response in the chat if you have anything to share. Simon, go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, Mandy. Hi, Megan. Hi, everybody. Nice to be here. I was drawn in by the title of today's topic, and I guess I feel slightly contrary, and which is part of my medicine anyway. But I don't know whether you've heard of Joseph Campbell's theory of a hero with 1,000 faces, and the fact that all story is basically a version of the one story. So my version is the butterfly journey, from the caterpillar to the butterfly, and the smaller story is one of caterpillar being the ego and the butterfly being the soul. So actually, I think personally is actually very simple, and we complicate matters. When we complicate matters, we're in the mode of caterpillar. When it becomes a lot simpler, we move into the soul, and there is a greater truth behind us all that all wants to emerge this butterfly story within. And yeah, I hear the story of the Nubian Woman, and I caught bits of it. Yeah, I think the bit that I connect with the most is the river, because again, through the mythoplastic teachings that I've learnt, the river means like the life journey for me, and you know, where how you traverse basically, you know, again, it's similar to the butterfly, from like source to mouth is the journey of your life as a river, you know, with hitting the boulders, hitting the rapids on the way down, or you know, when you feel it's not going anywhere, you're stuck in ego because you're going around in an eddy, in a stagnating pool, all of those particular things. So for me, it doesn't really matter what metaphor you choose. It's all part and parcel of the same story, but you know, I'm open to hearing the response. I've spoken.
Thanks for sharing.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mandy, for that beautiful story. And like Simon, I was drawn to the river, probably primarily because it was kind of like the third time that the river sort of figured prominently in my awareness today. So today I drove out of the city to my mechanic I love, in order to pick up my car early this morning. And the drive is all along the river. And on the way back, for some reason, a coyote crossed the road in front of my car, and I had to slow down. And I got to see it. And when it crossed the road towards the river, it looked back, and we came face to face. And I don't have an opportunity to see coyotes because I don't walk my dog the way my sister used to do in trails where you can come across them. So for me to see a coyote was a big deal. And of course, the coyote, the symbol of the trickster. I recall that from various readings and learnings that I've had the opportunity. And then just after seeing the coyote, Bruce Springsteen's song about, you know, going down to the river and the metaphor of the life, right? Starting off with promise and joy, and the river drying up, and having with it its curses. So that following from the coyote and then here, and then coming to your story today with the river, I just want to hold the mystery of the river today just a little bit close, and then just see what bubbles up. But I just wanted to note that I'm very grateful for the blessing of the river medicine.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's some powerful symbolism happening for you today.
All right. Well, anything you want to add to those? I have a few questions that I'd love to ask, kind of a little bit. I don't know if it's about the story, but now that we're on the other side of the story. But I also don't want to switch if you'd like anything you want to reflect back on the shares, or anything that comes up from that.
I think I really am grateful for any shares that come forward, and I hesitate to respond too much because again, like, want to keep it open and allow people to stay in the mystery of what's coming up. Whatever has been evoked for you is exactly right. It's exactly what the medicine of the story is today for you. And so whether that's the river, whether that's different stories that come up into mind, or different metaphors, or whatever it is exactly right. And I think when we can kind of give space for that, I've sat in stories where I've barely been present. It's taken me like 20 minutes to actually hear anything that the storyteller was saying, and then felt like, oh, I like I somehow did something wrong because I'm barely present. And that we have to break down that way of thinking, and just recognize wherever you enter, that's exactly what is there for you today. That's right. That's perfect. And wherever you exit, or wherever you hang out, if you hang out in a particular spot in the story the whole time, or even for weeks or years, that's exactly right. And so, yeah, that's all I want to respond with is like, embrace whatever it is that came up for you, and I really honor that as well.
Yeah, I'll add to that one of the part of the story that stuck with me, is sticking with me the most, is that when the hag was sort of like tricking the river demon on behalf of the girl. And it felt like that moment for me felt very true and completely perplexing at the same time. Like, I was like, what does this mean? Like, I'm like, how, it's like, there's just like this whole curiosity, but also like this resounding yes around it for me. So it's like, it's a good mystery to live into.
Mm-hmm.
That part of the story for me right now is and so many parts of the story really landed, but that one in particular got me.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I love that. On some level, we're listening to a story. It's like, the way that stories go, it's like, okay, this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then there's this person, and it's like chronological the way that stories are. And on another level, every element of the story, from the warriors and the grandmothers at the beginning, to the river hag, to the wounded, to the wounds, to the demon, to the judgmental girls, like, every element of the story is an element of me, is an element of you. We all have every single part of those stories inside of us, and that is something that, like, Carl Jung talked about a lot, and the archetypes that come forward in story, and we all are a multitude of archetypes. And so, I think that's a beautiful way to start to get curious about ourselves, and to find more and more acceptance and not judgment for ourselves and for each other. That, yeah, I do have that wounded one inside, and I do have that judgmental one inside, and I do have that demon inside that I'm running from, and I do have, like, I've got all of it. And I do have those wise elders, and I do have, and so do you. And so when we can find, like, those parts that are perplexing or that stick with us, it's interesting. It's like, oh, that part might be, like, kind of up right now.
Mm-hmm.
Curious.
Yeah, it might have some medicine for me. I mean, it all is medicine, right? But it's like, that might be a particular medicine that's calling me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So Just kind of tying this back to where we started. And please, if any of you have any questions too, feel free to pop them in the chat and we'll kind of integrate that as we're wrapping up here. Um, I'm just curious, like how kind of connecting the dots is like how do you imagine myth maybe, or do you imagine myth supporting this process of living into a bigger story, or what does actually living into a bigger story look um like say someone is listening and they're just like, well, I want to live into a bigger story. How do I do that? As you said in the beginning, we're often living in our smaller story as
Mm-hmm.
humans. It's just part of the human condition is forgetting, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think there's so many cool ways to do that. I love that question. Um, there's a couple things that like come immediately into my mind. I mean, one is just like start reading and listening to stories, mythological stories, old myths. Um, because as you might have found today, as you hear them, you enter into an alternative world. You enter into a different space, and you start to get curious about how things work in this world, or it introduces ideas about other stories, other ways that we could look at what's happening in our life. Am I at the bottom of the river right now? Am I running from a demon right now? Am I or am I reunited with my necklace? Like, so, all stories, that's just what could trickle out from this one, but like all stories can start to offer us ideas for how we can think about our life. So I would say, yeah, start like YouTube has stories. You can go to the bookstore and find old myths and things like that. So start engaging in story. Um, I'd also say, like I mentioned this before, like for me, astrology is a way to see our lives through a story in a sense. Particular kinds of astrology. I mean, there's a lot of different kinds of astrology. Some of it's like forecasting and like predictive, and that's not what I'm talking about necessarily, but like for me, evolutionary astrology is a way to look at the story that we're living within. In a way, it's similar to this story in that like we come into this world like our soul chooses when to come, and based on our soul's evolution, we choose exactly when to come and what archetypes we're going to arrange and work with in this lifetime, and how our soul can best evolve in this lifetime. And so for me, that's a way to kind of get curious about the bigger picture and the bigger story. I think also doing ancestral work and lineage work is a way to start to get curious about the bigger picture that we're living into. Like, we are all downstream of lots of ancestors, and we are all a part of a bigger story that we've inherited, and whether we're doing trauma work and trying to resolve that, like what we might think of as our own trauma, which is probably also intergenerational trauma on some level, um, or we're trying to understand, like, well, what are my gifts? What are my unique gifts, and what's my medicine, and what is, like the girl in the story, like, what is it that I forgot that I came here to be or to do or to offer? Um, I believe, it's my belief that doing lineage work can help us understand that, can help us not only address the challenges and the traumas that have been passed down, but also discover the gifts and the medicine that has been passed down that are uniquely ours to carry. Um, so I also think that engaging with the land, going on wanders with the land, in really asking the land, like, help me understand the story that I'm living in. Show me what I need to know about the story that I'm living within. and starting to see what comes forward. What are the elements in the landscape that pop out to you? You know, what I like to do is go on these journeys with the land with that question, like, help me understand what story I'm living within, or where I'm at in this story, or whatever. And I'll notice what pops out to me. You know, maybe it's that fallen tree, or maybe it's the hawk that flew over just then, or maybe it's you know, this pile of rocks that I noticed. Just noticing whatever strikes me, and then I like to do like a little, like, doodle it out, like draw a little storyboard of it, of those elements, so that I can remember what the land was telling me. And when I see it, when I draw it or I write it, I see it. It is a story. I see it. And then I'm like, oh, And just like this story is a mystery that we just told, those wanders are a mystery too, but I get to live into it a little bit and play with it. So those are a couple of the ideas that come forward right away for me.
Yeah, I love those are great ideas. I love them all. Um, yeah, and I will just add on too. I forgot to mention this in the beginning, but Mandy does a lot of guiding, both in person and virtually, around these sorts of, you know, wanderings and the old ways and all kinds of things. Oh, actually, while I'm mentioning that, I'm going to pop your website in the chat just so everyone has it. Mandy and I used to both live in Colorado at the same time once upon a time. So I got to go on a medicine walk that Mandy guided, and it was really quite lovely. So highly recommend checking out her work. And I saw that Simon was sharing, you know, it sounds like one of the stories that's really he's been working with is the story of Orion, and just shared that it's been really helpful with moving away from the effects of toxic masculinity towards a new divine way of being for men. I guess that story comes through the Aboriginal song lines.
Really?
Yeah, he said it's arguably one of the is the oldest story on the planet, according to the Aboriginal song lines.
Ooh. Well,
Yeah.
I'm very interested in that, Simon. Thanks for dropping that in. I'll look into that myself.
Yeah, I can either speak into it or we can have a chat beyond this, portal this evening if you like. I'd be open for that. Yeah, it's a story that basically occurs both in the Aboriginal songlines and Greek mythology, so in two different chapters of our collective history, and seemingly not related. So that's interesting to see that comes up in both of those places.
That's very interesting.
And I want to like kind of accentuate, I think in evolutionary, when you were speaking about evolutionary astrology, you mentioned this in the beginning, is that it's like there's a mystery. This isn't predictive. This isn't figuring it out. This isn't coming away from the story with an answer, or figuring out what our story is before it reveals itself. Like, I love, even when we were talking before we started, you had shared that the story is living. So we'll see what version of the story comes out today. And I feel like that way of being with all of this is really, for me, has been it's actually been very challenging on my path to like let go of trying to have answers. And even this whole series is funny because I think, Simon, something you said made me think of this, is like there's an intellectual aspect to everything that has been, all the topics that have been shared through this series. But then there's also, I think, what it just keeps coming back to over and over again is like living into the mystery of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's such a practice, right? Like, it is so hard, especially for many of us coming from this society where we figure it out and where we have an answer and where we explain things away, and we flatten. And so it's really counterculture. It's really kind of going against the grain to pull back from that and give it space to be unknown and to be mysterious and to not know, to breathe with it, let it live, let it change, let it evolve, let it be whatever it wants to be. And it's a practice. It's like a daily practice, like meditation, like sometimes it
Mhm.
goes better than others.
Yeah. Sometimes not knowing is great. Sometimes not knowing is extremely frustrating or even terrifying.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. All right, great. Well, I think that's a good note to end on. Anything else you wanted to share, Mandy?
Um, just thanks for being present. Thanks for coming. Thanks for listening. Thanks for allowing me to share and pass on a story that's been passed to me with so much gratitude. I get to give that voice, and that's the way the stories do live. Is that they're oral. It's this oral tradition. We share them, and then they live within you, and then maybe you pass them on in some form or fashion. And so thank you for letting me be that part of this lineage.
Yeah. Thank you for passing the story on to us and for taking time for all of this to prepare, to show up, to offer your perspective and wisdom. It's really been fun.
So fun. Thank you, Megan.
Yep. So thanks everyone for watching. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you. I know a number of you watching and also watching the playback have followed this entire series, and I'm really grateful. If you missed any, the links are on the website, and I'll send out a playback after. So much love.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.